if you're watching this video and you got a tough life, separate time from money. It's about accountability. It was like, you got to put in more effort than everyone else. And I think a lot of my fire and my hunger today to succeed and my perseverance and dedication, it really did come from that poorer upbringing. But we're gonna talk about what it's really like to be poor, because a lot of people grow up and they don't know, they're middle class, they've never experienced true poverty. And I think to understand and reflect upon what it's like to really be poor and understand poverty is to understand what it takes to become wealthy and understand some of the mentalities that a lot of us have in the bottom half of society versus the top half of society. And we can take some of those learning outcomes and lessons and improve from them. I actually grew up really impoverished with a single mom trying to just scrape to make ends meet. And I'm going to talk about my experience from when I was basically zero till I turned about 18 and how everything turned for me and I became a multi-millionaire today. And we're going to talk about some of the poor man's mentalities, mindsets, and share some of the things from a mindset perspective, because I do believe that wealth starts in the mind, and the mindset and the mind is a very, very powerful tool that most people underestimate. There's a study about these monkeys that go up the top of the tree to get bananas. They like the bananas, they could see them there. They don't go up to get the banana, get the fruit, and they don't know why. And I'm going to my story in a little bit here, so stay tuned for that. And I'll share kind of where I came from and where my mindset kind of evolved and shifted and changed. So this video is going to talk about my experience, and it's not going to necessarily be one that's going to be a rah-rah. It's a bit of a sad story in some senses, but happy because I did evolve from that environment of being impoverished and growing up with some of the people who didn't have so much. Like, share, subscribe. Before I say anything else, there's gonna be a lot of people jumping on here that are gonna say, you know, Mike, you're maybe a bit of a poverty tourist in the sense that you live in a first world country. You had clean drinking water, you had access to public education, you did have access to the internet, though I didn't have internet access. I had to go to the library for internet, but I eventually did get access to the internet in the late 2000s. So yes, I did have many luxuries that were afforded to me. And if you live in Canada, United States, Europe, any developed nation, like there are so many places, Japan, all these countries where there is opportunity for you, there is no excuse. You just need to change your mindset. But I want to start with helping understand, because I work with a lot of tenants in our real estate portfolio that are suffering in poverty, and a lot of it isn't their fault. In fact, if you look at some of the data around poverty, you'll understand that there are many circumstances out of our control, and what we have to do is focus on what we can control. And let's look at someone who's a single mom, right? Imagine a single mom here today who gets, government money, $1,200 a month or something to that effect, and they have 2 kids to support, and their rent is $800 or $900. They have $300 left over just to put, food on the table. And you might say, well, they can go get a job, but then their government support will be clawed back. And often, if we look at some of the overall circumstance, and I'm going to my story in a little bit here, so stay tuned for that, and I'll share kind of where I came from and where my mindset kind of evolved and shifted and changed when I went off to university. So if you're looking at that single mom, right, and they're suffering through the poverty mindset, they are struggling often from, there's vices and bad habits and the wrong people in their life. Often it's bad circumstance that leads to poverty, right? Bad mindset in the beginning. I want to share a story actually, now that I'm thinking about it. There's a study done, I'd have to look up what it is, but just off the top of my head, there's a study about these monkeys that go up the top of the tree to get bananas. And they occasionally shock one of the monkeys on the way up to get the bananas, so the monkey stops going up to get the banana, right? To chase the wealth of the fruit. And eventually the other monkeys stop going up to get the fruit as well, because they notice that one of the monkeys has been shocked. Generations of monkeys go by, and 3, 4, 5 generations of monkey go by, and they don't know why they don't go up to get the banana, get the fruit. They don't even know that the first monkeys were shocked. The first, 1 in every 5 monkeys was shocked. They just do what their ancestors did. And so because their parents and their grandparents never went up to get fruit, they didn't go up the tree to get the fruit. Even though they liked the bananas, they could see them there, they didn't go up there because they were trained not to do it. It's bad mindset. And that's a perfect example. We as humans do the exact same thing. So what are the main causes of poverty? Before I share my story, what are some of the main causes? Bad circumstance. So sometimes it's bad weather, bad, place you're born on the earth. Certain things can happen, bad circumstances happen, and that can cause poverty. but it isn't a reason to stay impoverished. Another one is lack of opportunity. People are born without the opportunity, and I'm not going to lie that there are people who are born, and I remember when I went to school and met at university many wealthy people who'd grown up with wealthy, privileged backgrounds, and I didn't have a privileged background, so I remember feeling almost jealous. And this was a poor man's mentality because I grew up poor. I was jealous of their opportunity. While I was working after school at a part-time minimum wage job, they were taking piano lessons and getting tutored. While I was trying to make food for my brother because my mom hadn't come from work yet, and I was struggling to keep the house together because no one was home, they were at home having an enriched, nourished life on the internet, learning how to code or whatever it is that they were doing, right? Building their resume. And so they had a leg up. Lack of opportunity does exist. It is real, but how you react to that, you can create opportunity for yourself. And I'm gonna get into what I did to create opportunity. There's obviously things like education are a big one. Maybe your parents are uneducated and you aren't properly educated. You're gonna have a bad mindset. You're gonna have that disadvantage. Imagine going into an interview where math skills are very important and your parents didn't practice any of that and they didn't value school grades. They didn't value you even attending school. In fact, your parents encourage you to skip school. That would be sort of mentality that you grow up with, and you're left in a poverty mindset, and then you're left uneducated because you didn't follow through in school. You maybe failed out of school, you dropped out in high school, and so it's hard to make that shift and to build those blocks. But it again comes back to mentality. I'm going to talk about that. The next thing is lack of family support is a big one as well for causing of poverty. I meet people who have sick grandparents or sick parents, or they have maybe a disability with their brother or sister, and that's their crutch. They've spent, instead of spending their time studying in school or spending time with a part-time job or building skills or focusing on themselves and their own future and their own development, they spent a lot of their energy taking care of family. And so it's an unfortunate circumstance that can cause and continue to perpetuate poverty and the poor man's mentality. And it's unfortunate, but I am of the belief that if your family is dragging you down and the people you grew up with are keeping you down, they're keeping you on that negative mindset, they're keeping you from succeeding, from getting a job, from benefiting yourself. I took the stance that I moved out when I was 17 and moved away. I focused on myself, and then once you've built yourself to a place where you can support yourself, then you can go back and support someone else. It's the same thing in an airplane where they say put on your own air mask first. Put on your own life jacket in an event of emergency before you go and help the person beside you with a life jacket. I do believe in that mentality full-heartedly, and I think if you put on your own life jacket first, you'll be able to help 10 people versus putting a life jacket on of one person and then you drowning and not being able to help anyone else. So I believe truly that if you help yourself first, you can help more people. So help yourself, but do it with the right motivations. And for me, it was about helping my own family. My own mother has lived in many of my rental properties. I do support my family in many ways. And so it's about giving back at the end of the day, but you have to invest in yourself before you can give to others. And that's a mentality that poor people don't have. They give everything they have immediately, rather than investing in themselves and then being able to give more, actually, and they don't understand that. The other thing is mindset. I've mentioned this a bunch of times, but mindset's a big one. There's this thought cycle around, I call it like the three things I think I wrote down: verbal, modeling, and experience. So verbal is like when you say things, you hear people I talk to, friends of mine who grew up and are still very poor. And they have this, I couldn't do that. I can't afford a house. I can't get that job. I can't go to that university. I couldn't study that online. I could never learn to code. I can't. And statements close your mind to opportunities. Instead, the right thing to do is ask yourself, how could I learn to code? How could I get that job? How could I buy my first property? How could I do this? And that's the smart thing, is how can I? And the question already opens the mind up. The mind, even when you're sleeping, will continue to think on that question. It will ruminate and it will find a solution and an answer. So it's about mindset, asking yourself and thinking through, how do I solve this problem, as opposed to making a statement that forces you not to search for the answer. It's the easy way to say, hey, I can't do that, therefore I'm not going to look into it. So ask yourself, how can I do it? And believe that you can, because you can, honestly. It doesn't matter where you come from, you can become better than you were before. Even 1% better each and every day compounds to 1,000,000% return over a lifetime. And so that means anyone can transform. So verbal, it's what you say. It's in your verbal cues that you use. You got to start modifying your verbal cues. So become very optimistic as opposed to being pessimistic and negative. Try to be positive. Next is modeling. So by modeling, I mean mentorship, and I mean all of us humans model each other. In the monkey example I just talked about, the other monkeys modeled their parents and their grandparents. And because they didn't go get the fruit, they thought, well, that's not what we do. We don't get the fruit. But if you were to model monkeys that went up to get the fruit, then you would do the same thing. You would go chase after that. Same is true for the mindset, and I believe for us as humans. If you can find a mentor or model someone who's successful, maybe I'm all you have. Maybe you just found this video and you don't know anyone else. You grew up very poor like I did. You have no one else in your life, no mentor who's out there to help you. You have me. You can watch some of my videos if you'd like, and you can learn about some of the things that I've been doing to succeed and model even 1 or 2 or 3 of those behaviors. And then you'll find other people. You'll go out to networking events and maybe you'll meet people who are doing exactly what you want to do. So you got to plan for your future and then take action on that by surrounding yourself with the right people and then model the right people's behavior. The poor person models the wrong behavior. They see their parents out there, maybe their parents are criminals and they've been stealing. They see their parents doing drugs. That's another big one coming up here is vices and bad habits. Vices and bad habits are one of the leading causes of poverty. Smoking, drinking, drugs, poor spending decisions, all of these things, gambling, all of these vices and bad habits will leave you impoverished and poor. And if your parents always gambled and they took you to the casino when you turned of age, or your parents were always drinking and your positive experiences as a kid with your father were drinking alcohol together, you may become an alcoholic as well. So those mentalities rub off, but the good thing is we can make a change. So just because our parents did something doesn't mean we have to do the same thing. Studies show that we mostly follow the actions of our models, of our mentors, and often that's people in our immediate network, our close friends, our family. And so birds of a feather, if you hang out with the wrong people, you will become the average of the 5 or 10 people that you model like. So verbal is very important, what you say, what you do, modeling who you try to be like, who you surround yourself with, who you're trying to emulate, because that's how human socialization works. We become like the people we spend the most time around. If you spend time around bad people, you will adopt their mindsets and their bad habits. Experience is another one, the final thing I think. What you say, who you model, and what your experiences are lead to the type of mindset that you have. So if you've had bad experiences, for instance, imagine as a young child, your parents coming home and saying, my boss shafted me, he's a rich tard. And you have that bad mentality ingrained in you at a young age. You're gonna think, greed is bad, money is bad, my boss was wealthy, he shafted my parents, therefore money is bad. Or maybe you had a bad experience yourself with someone who was wealthy. And that negative mindset, that bad experience will compound because wisdom comes from our knowledge and our experiences. And so I want you to start having better experiences. It starts with having better modeling. It starts with saying, better verbal. But if you surround yourself with the right people, maybe you have all negative influences around you and you just have a computer in front of you and all you have is YouTube videos. Watch positive videos. Watch videos like this where you can change your mindset, where you can surround yourself and model people online. That's what I did. That's my story. And we're going to get into my story in just a second. The last one I want to talk about after vices and bad habits and things like that is mental illness. It's actually a really tough one because 20% of people have a mental illness. So 1 in 5 people suffer from mental illness. It's very sad. Bipolar, manic depressive, just plain old depression, schizophrenia. There's so many different mental illnesses that basically not only are they a terrible mindset, but they make it impossible to build any real wealth, to really elevate from poverty, right? Bad decisions compound, just like good decisions compound. And so when you're not able to make rational decisions and able to control your emotion and become level on the playing field, it really is hard to get ahead in society. And so there are many reasons for poverty, and not everyone can elevate from poverty, but I believe that not everyone will elevate from poverty, but everyone can. And I believe people can get treatment for mental illness. They can get treatment for whatever vices they have or bad habits can be changed. All of these things can be changed for 99% of the population. So that's what this video is about, is talking about those opportunities for that. And so now I'm going to share a little bit of my story, which you guys have been waiting for probably until now. As people who know, I was born in London, Ontario, and I grew up when I was about 1.5, 2 years old. My parents kind of split up when my dad kind of went out of the picture for a while, and my mom took me away. So I didn't get to see any of that side of the family. She moved away from all of our family. And I grew up in kind of Sarnia, Ontario area. Basically, my brother was born when I was 4. So it's my first brother. I have more than one brother, but my first brother was born when I was 4. And out of wedlock, of course. I was born out of wedlock, and so was my brother. And I remember us moving around. We were in the slums in Sarnia in like apartments, and it was always tough. We didn't really have a lot. I was thankful that my mom was able to, find the means to get, I remember getting toys on Christmas and things like that. It's not like I didn't have basic necessities growing up in the 90s, but there were times where, like for instance, when I was 4, my mom and her boyfriend split up, and her boyfriend saw that my dad was doing all right in London and he should pay some child support, and went after it, and it was this big 7-year court battle. It's one of those things where it was really emotional for everyone involved in the family, and there was a big court battle that ensued, and my mom actually gave custody to her boyfriend. So I was living with not my mom or my dad when I was 4 years old, and I lived with him till I was 10 or 11, so for 6 or 7 years in the ghetto in Sarnia. And we never had money really for rent. He went after me to get custody to, I believe initially, my mom just wasn't in a position where she was mentally in a state to take care of us, and financially was the big thing. She didn't have the money to take care of us, and so he had a job at the time, so we started living with him, and then he lost his job. So growing up with my stepdad, it was tough. There was drugs and things like that, and tons of issues. When you grow up in poverty, you really learn what it's like to grow up with people who have those really bad mentalities. Theft is a big thing in impoverished communities. People believe that, I'm not speaking for all people in the ghettos and the poor areas, but there's this victim mentality where they believe society is to blame, or the government's to blame, or the wealthy are to blame, and to take from them so you can have now is not necessarily a bad thing. They think that's a positive thing, like a Robin Hood type mentality. And so there's a lot of these negative mentalities, but basically, so he's getting the child support from my dad, went after my dad for some child support. My dad came back in my life, which is an amazing thing. I'm really thankful. I talk about mentorship a lot on this channel, but my dad came back in my life. He would see me twice a month, and my dad had a decent job here in London. And so I get to see my dad. He was a normal person, didn't have any real mental illness, and kind of kept things together. Owned a little bit of real estate, so I got to learn a little bit about real estate. Mostly I just did a little bit of painting and stuff like that on the weekends, but it was good for me, right? It was have that mentorship and to see that, hey, if you work hard, you can be average in society. And so I do credit a lot of positivity to that, having my dad come back in my life. And yeah, I mean, my stepdad did, he, at first I think it was about the money, but we did develop a good relationship. And despite being poor, there was always a focus. I remember Child's Aid Society coming in all the time. I have a negative impression of Child's Aid Society, always trying to take me from my mom's house and my dad's house. And it was, my stepdad anyway. So it was really tough having them come in. And I remember they were very focused, thankfully, on good grades. So for the child support checks to continue, the government money to continue, because in Canada, if you have children, you get government money. And if the government money were to continue, certain grades had to be met. So then there was a crackdown I remember I think I was in grade 3 or 4, and I'd missed like 100 days of 200 and something days in the school year. So I'd missed almost half the school year just in absences, right? Because school was not an important thing, right? Maybe we just would miss a lot of days, and it's tough when you're going through that. And going into class, you have friends who all have stable parents, and I went to an elementary school that had, I went to a few elementary schools because we moved around a lot. I remember we couldn't make rent, and we'd move from Petrolia to Sarnia to Brights Grove and all the places in and around Forest and all these different areas in Lambton County. And so I moved around, a dozen times or more. Moving around as a child is hard. It destroys your mindset to have a space that's your own, and then to move to another place where you and your brother are sharing bunk beds, and then move to another place. You don't really have a place that you can call home. That's really hard on the mind. And it took a lot for me when I moved out at 17 and went to university on a partial ride scholarship to change a lot of my mentalities that I had. And I think a lot of my fire and my hunger today to succeed, and my perseverance and dedication it really did come from that poorer upbringing. As much as there was, like a lot of days where all we had for dinner was peanut butter sandwich on white bread, there was also many days where I would remember on the first of the month when all the money would come in, that things would be good. We would have a lot of fun. And so there was that sort of association with money meant happiness. It meant we could put gas in the vehicle and go places. It meant that, I could we would go shopping and we would get snacks for our lunch. And I remember having snacks as a kid was a great thing, and having a nice, nutritious lunch. I would get, like a turkey sandwich as opposed to just peanut butter on bread. So there's a lot of upgrades and things like that when you have that money come in. And I remember the last couple of weeks of the month was always the hardest, and we'd get kicked out of a place, or water hydro would get shut off the place we were living. And I remember having cold showers, going to school, have to have a cold shower because there is no gas to heat the hot water, or the hydro's out, and so you have to read by candle. So things like that growing up, as bad as I'm making it sound, there are a lot of people who had it a lot worse than I did. I wasn't majorly abused in any way. There was some, spanking and stuff like that, like more violence than maybe there should have been, but I wasn't necessarily ever extremely abused, or I grew up in a house where there was a lot of smoke in the air. You couldn't really see across the room because there's so much smoke and stuff like that, but no major abuses. And so I'm very thankful that my life is not the worst that it could have been, and that I didn't stay in the mentality. When I was 12, my mom actually got custody of us back. So I'm back to live with my mom, who I didn't really know all that well, because she had been, there was a restraining order basically put against her. So I didn't even see my own mom. She would try to come to the school, and he wouldn't allow that, the stepdad. So went back to live with her, and it improved a bit. She struggled. I remember us being on, going to the food bank to get food sometimes when there wasn't enough. She worked a minimum wage job at a call center, and still does to this day. And it was tough for us, growing up. And thankfully, she lived in a place in Brights Grove where there was a lot of really wealthy neighbors. So the school I went to, actually, despite being the poorest kid in my school, I think I was actually the poorest kid in my school. My clothes always smelled. First they smelled like smoke, then I went back to live with my mom, and then they smelled like garbage. Unfortunately, the whole hoarder thing. You should watch the show Hoarders Buried Alive. You basically can understand what I went through. That basically, if you watch that show, was my childhood. And so, yeah, I met in high school, I met some really good group of friends. And so for those people who are watching, like Colin is one of my best friends still to this day. In high school we met, and he's today a medical resident, became a doctor, great guy. But his parents were, I think, really supportive of him, and I met really good group of friends in grade 9. And so for my high school career, things changed, and I pivoted in grade 9 from like a low 70s average to like a 90s average. I realized that studying was important. I hung out with friends who went to the library to study. And I'm a very competitive person, and I love, evolving. And so I took on this challenge of competing academically and made education an important thing. It was a way that it was level playing field. Like, I couldn't compete on any other aspect, but with education I could. I had the same high school textbooks that everyone else did. And so that gave me a bit of an edge. And we actually got internet. Remember, my mom got internet when I was in grade 8. And I got a computer, and everyone else had already had a computer, and I always hand wrote my essays, and everyone else had typed up, printed essays. I'm not that old, guys. I'm 26, so this is not that long ago. Like, everyone had computers except for us. I used to go to bike to the library to do my homework and stuff, and I remember handwriting stuff. But in grade 9, I had access to high-speed internet. I saved up and got my computer. My grandparents got together and actually got me that computer, so I'm very thankful for my grandparents that stepped in and kind of, my grandma was amazing. Both my grandmas and my grandpa all stepped in to help in the custody battle, and they helped. I remember when school would start, they would come down and get us clothes. They would try to get access to me as much as they could, despite the whole custody situation. They couldn't see me very often. I remember my grandfather drove down one time and hadn't seen me in 3 years, and there was a big fight, and he tried to get access to us. And one of the longest custody battles, 7-way custody battles, to my grandparents, my mom, my dad, and then this stepdad who wasn't biologically related, but basically raised me for half of my childhood or more. And it was a wild ride that taught me a lot. I'm very thankful that my stepdad, despite having issues with drugs and some of, I think, mental illness of his own, was actually, at the end of the day, I think, truly a caring person. And he was very intelligent. I think his IQ probably is 150, 160. And so I remember at 7 or 8 years old, him teaching me about the process of like the politics system, and teaching me about, how, trees would absorb energy and things, like just abstract things. While he was maybe high, he would kind of speak about these things. And I credit a lot of my success in academia to the upbringing that I had. I had some silver nuggets that made me who I am today, right, and helped shape my mentality. And anyway, because I focused on academia, went off to university at 17. I'm very thankful that at 16 I met Elise, my wife. We've been together 11 years this November. And so we started dating technically when I was 15, but I turned 16 like a week later. Or right around when I was 16, let's just call it 16. Yeah, she was a big impact. I would stay over at her house a few nights a week, and so I'd get away from what I was dealing with there. And she helped me get my first job at Tim Hortons when I turned 15, when I was 16. So for the last 2 years of my high school, I had a great job at Tim Hortons where I was able to work 30 or 40 hours a week. So I worked almost full time while attending high school. And that allowed me to buy a car. Once I had my own car, I could do whatever I wanted. I was independent. My only reason to come back home was to take care of my brother. He was 4 years younger than me, so I had to make sure that I looked out for him as best I could. And I feel like always should have done more. I focused on my education and myself. And I still wish I could have been there for him more. And to this day, I still try to support him. And he's a great guy. We still have a great relationship today. Things turned around. My girlfriend got in my life, Elise, and now my wife. And we went off to university, and I excelled. I did very well there, and I had a hunger, and I found financial independence, and I found early retirement, and I found all of these guys online who became my mentors. I found people like Jacob Lundfisker. I found on the frugality side, I read all these books, every book that I could get my hands on, because it was all free at the library with my tuition. And I just learned a ton about business. I learned a ton about everything, because I thought money was the center of the universe. And for people who are really poor, who don't even have money for food, you realize that money is the center. And then my mindset evolved about 19 years old or so, bought my first property. And my mindset had totally shifted to now being about financial independence and freedom. So it's not really about being wealthy. It was about having enough to be financially free, that 4% rule. And so that's where kind of it all evolved from. And my mindset over time just sort of shifted from being one that was focused on this victim mentality to one where there's opportunity everywhere if you look for it. And I went from the first job at Tim Hortons to slowly building my resume. And I got another job. I worked at the government, and then I worked for a bank as a teller. And then I leveraged that experience to work at KPMG in accounting, and then in consulting, doing IT consulting, and sort of just learned. Every person that I met, one of my, I think, keys to beating this poor mentality and adopting this wealth mentality was accountability. Like if that was the one thing that, if you're accountable for your action and you put in, it's about effort. You got to put in the effort. But if you expect a result from not putting in the effort, you're going to fail. It was like, you got to put in more effort than everyone else, because you don't come, like I always remembered, I didn't come from that advantage. When everyone else could afford tutors in university, I couldn't. So I had to focus on just working that much harder than the next person. And then it's not about the effort, it's about the result. That's actually something from my childhood. I remember watching something that was like, it's not about the effort, it's about the result. That's a big thing. You can put in all the effort in the world, but if you're not being smart about it, then you're not going to get the results. And the wealthy they pay by result. People like to put in the time and expect an hourly wage. Separate time from money. You have to put in the effort. You're not going to get it for free. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a hard grind. Like for me to go from zero net worth to multi-millions was a grind. I've put in 100-hour weeks consistently for over 7 years. Most people wouldn't have the perseverance to do that. And we're going to talk in the next video. It's going to be a really positive video. And I'm sorry I kind of shared my experiences here. And you guys already know my story for the most part. But everything kind of changed. Got accepted to the Richard Ivey School of Business. It is the top business program in Canada, modeled after Harvard Business School, case-based method of learning. And I met a ton of really great people there that helped build who I am today. I've always been open to finding mentorship and trying to learn from people. I'm a really good modeler. That's another one of the things I'm really good at. If you put me in the room with 3 super high achievers, I will learn the best of all 3 and emulate it. Like I'm a really good chameleon. I can pick up anything and emulate it. And that's been a skill that I think we should all learn, is find those people who are doing that one thing really well and find someone else who's doing the other thing really well, combine the two, X and Y, and you've got the best recipe for success. And that's at the end of the day, what it takes to succeed is that continued drive, and don't give up. If you're watching this video and you feel like you grew up with a single mom and whatever, and you got a tough life, you didn't get into university, it's not over. University wasn't necessarily what propelled me. I would have probably done better if I had not gone to university, if I just picked up a trade. I was going to become a plumber. For a while, I thought plumbing, electrical was going to be the better way to go. In hindsight, I'd probably be wealthier today. Wouldn't be able to buy property sooner, have more wealth. I wouldn't have wasted all that money on education and networking. Hopefully it pays off. Fingers crossed that it does. I can leverage that experience and make it positive. But this was a long-winded video on my story. I'm hoping that at the end of this, you jump in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, you smash that like button and share it with someone who's maybe has that poverty mindset. Maybe they have that poor man's mindset and they're not even poor. They've just got a bad mindset. And then send them the following video, because the second video we're going to film here is going to be about the rich man's mindset and talking a bit about how to build that wealth mindset that gets you to the millionaire or the next level status and helps you really evolve. And that's honestly what I'm trying to do with this channel, is help you guys spend less, earn more, and maximize your returns, unlock a wealth through you, because your financial destiny is in your control. And I do believe that you can take action today and that you can move the needle forward today. Even if you're 1% better than you were yesterday, that is leaps and bounds better than you were. If you compound it every day and just be 1% better, you'll be 100% better in 100 days. So I implore you to take that challenge and to be a better you. Thank you all for watching. Mike Rosehart. I appreciate it. See you in the comments.